And I'm recording. Right. Okay. So welcome everybody. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to mute everybody here. And then, oops. Where are we going to mute everybody? So I'm going to mute everybody and I'm going to talk for a short while. And then whoever's got questions, I'm going to leave time at the end for questions. What I'm wanting to do with this series is go through Jim McAfee's book, Your Body's Sign Language. It's this book over here, which I've really enjoyed because Jim McAfee is a clinical nutritionist. And he has been very instrumental in developing this book and training other clinical nutritionists in nutrition on the whole. And this book has actually become the recommended textbook for the clinical nutritionist in the States. It does not mention Neolife or GNLD or anything at all anywhere in the book. But we know that the basis of his information all comes from Neolife. And that's what I love about it. If you are wanting to go and check out his website as well, it's imageawareness.com. And a lot of, or all of his newsletters dating back something like over 20 years are there. Yeah. And there are a lot of scientific papers that he's got over there as well. And then under resources and tools, all of the recordings, a few years ago, Charlie gave us a DVD with Jim McAfee recordings on it. And most of those recordings, from what I can tell, are now available free of charge on his website. All you have to do is download the MP3. And those talks are fascinating. That's the basis of where I get a lot of my information from. Between this book and Jim McAfee's website and the recordings is where I get a lot of my information from. So I thought it would be, thanks, thought it would be fun just to go through the technical bits. I call it technical, but it's a little bit more in depth. Obviously, we are not doing any medical training over here. This is not putting out cures and all the rest of it. Purely information. As I always tell my patients, our bodies are talking to us all the time, and we need to listen to what it's saying. If you drive a car and suddenly a little red light comes up on the dashboard, it tells you that there's a problem. Maybe your water light has come on, and it tells you either your fan belt is blown or your water level is low. We don't know exactly what it is until we stop and check it. If your oil light comes on, similar sort of thing. It's telling you that there's a problem. You need to stop your car, check it, and work out what the problem is, fix it, and you carry on. If you ignore the red light, or you take a piece of duct tape and put it over the red light, that can disappear. And the problem's gone, or the problem is masked. The problem is still there. And you carry on until your engine seizes. And then it's, whoops, what happened? And we tend to do a similar thing. There are all sorts of little signs that our bodies are telling us that there's a problem. I know I'm guilty of it myself. We tend to ignore those signs and symptoms until there's a crash and you land up in hospital. And he's broken the book up into different sections, and I'd like to go through each section as we go along. If it gets boring somewhere along the line, please tell me, we'll change tack along the way. But he goes through the different sections of body shaping. I touched on that briefly last week. Scalp and hair, which relates to things like baldness, dandruff, excess facial hair, prematurely gray hair. Most of us, I think, are probably guilty of the prematurely gray hair because we're all still young. But things like cataracts, floaters in the eye, ear infections, hearing loss, and I'm just bouncing around at the moment. Tartar on the teeth, tooth decay, appendicitis is an indication of a problem. Bleeding gums, bumps on the skin, fluid retention, premature wrinkling, skin tags. Now, skin tags are those things that keep your dermatologist busy by even tying them off and burning them off, or your GP as well. But it's actually a sign of a problem. Your arthritis, brittle nails, carpal tunnel syndrome, bowed legs, back pain, osteoporosis, kidney stones, hemorrhoids, anorexia, gallstones, going so far as breast cancer in male and female, frequent urination, joint and muscle pain, all sorts of different things, migraines, which we book down as genetic or other issues, are diet related. And when the crash comes, if we ignore the signs, we'll end up with the doctors, and with no disrespect to them, they pile us full of drugs. And yes, the medication does help in certain cases, but in my opinion, it shouldn't be chronic. It should be to fix a problem for a short period of time, go off it, and carry on life as normal. And again, my opinion and in my theory, if your body is giving you a sign of a problem, it's probably not a lack of a medication. It's more likely a lack of a nutrient, because we are designed as such a finely tuned machine that heals itself, that we need to be tuned into what our body is telling us all the time. So I'm going to go through this book little bit by little bit, and as I go through it, I'm going to, at further stages, also go through or try and put up a few PowerPoints to make it a little bit more interesting and to get the notes down over there. Obviously, all of these will be recorded, but I think it's probably a good idea just to summarize things as well. When you look around, if ever you're out in the public again, and you look around, what do you see? Please excuse a little bit of baby noise in the background over here. We have visitors again. But when you look around at people, what do you see? Do you see vibrant health? Do you see drained looking people? Do you see stressed looking people? Are they bouncing around? Are they maybe a little bit hyper? What are they doing? Because once you start to tune in and look, you will notice that there's a lot of sick people in the world. There's a lot of sick people mentally, but there's also a lot of sick people physically. They will try and mask it, but they're not always that successful. We are not out to fix sick people. We are out to help people maintain their health and to stay healthy. So you'll always hear in the talks, we're not looking for sick people, we're looking for healthy people to help them maintain their health. A few simple signs to start with is body shape. I went through it the other day about the three basic body shapes, but we'll start with a little bit of summary over here. The first one that he refers to is called beer belly syndrome, also referred to as central adiposity, if you want to be more polite. He says there are other endearing terms for that, called spare tire syndrome, or Dunlop's disease, or furniture disease, where your chest drops into your drawers. So weight gain about the middle is an indicator of syndrome X, which is a pre-diabetic condition associated with excess insulin. So those people need to have their blood sugar levels checked, because they could very well be pre-diabetic and not be aware of it. And a pre-diabetic is in a fairly dangerous situation, but it's treatable and you can prevent it becoming a much bigger problem. The body's insulin production increases as soon as the fat cells refuse to answer the call of insulin's knock at the door. The more insulin the body creates, the more resistant the fat cells become. Eventually, the cascading effect of high insulin can damage the body overall by inducing high blood pressure, building dangerous levels of blood fats, damaging liver function, and boosting weight gain. Unhealthy weight gain puts pressure on the joints, resulting in excessive wear and tear, deterioration, and back pain. And I see this very regularly. Obviously, being in the orthopedic business, people come to our local orthopedic surgeon for knee problems and joint problems, which a joint problem, the fancy medical term for a joint problem is arthritis, simply meaning inflammation of the joints. Arth meaning joint, itis meaning inflammation. So medical people like to give big fancy terms to comparatively simple problems. And one of the signs that I'll have, just as a for instance, somebody will come into my office and they'll be complaining about back pain. And I'm immediately going to start asking them a whole string of different questions. Have you fallen? Have you been involved in a car accident? Did you pick up something too heavy? That sort of thing. If they say no to all of those, my back has just been getting progressively more sore over the years, I'm going to check their legs, because quite probably one leg is shorter than the other. Now, with no disrespect to the doctors, you go to the doctor and you say, I've got a back pain. They're going to treat your back pain by prescribing anti-inflammatories or pain meds or all of the above, maybe refer you to a physiotherapist or a chiropractor. They're working on the back pain. What is causing that back pain? If you've fallen off a stepladder recently, I'll understand it. If you've had a car accident, I'll understand it. But if there's no obvious cause, I'm going to check your legs to see where the problem is. Because it could be that you fractured your leg once before, and that one leg is now shorter than the other, which now causes an imbalance in the back, which leads to back pain. That's one of the little signs. Getting back to the weight gain, obviously that also puts a lot of pressure on your heart and your lungs when you're lying down, as well as on the kidneys, as well as on the joints. What happens again with a larger belly, and pregnant ladies or those who have been pregnant would be able to identify, because as a counterbalance, when we stand up, we're using our core tummy muscles to keep us upright. Now, if you've got a hernia, which is a burst through your gut, and now the tummy starts to pop out, you develop a hernia that way, or you're pregnant and that belly gets quite big, you, as a counterbalance, tend to lean backwards, which puts a lot more strain on the lower back. There's also an increase in weight, which now puts more strain on the knees specifically, but also on the feet. So foot problems become a big issue as well. John and Debbie, I don't think you were here the other night when I did this talk, but one of the health indicators that you can do to test yourself, don't look at a scale, but you take a tape measure and you measure your waist. And you measure your waist at the biggest area, the narrowest point of the waist, and then you take a measurement of your hips. And you divide those two figures. A healthy measurement for women is less than 0.8 and less than 1.0 for men. So don't worry about what the scale says. Take a tape measure and measure your waist and your hips, and you'll get a pretty good idea of where you stand. The pot belly is closely coupled to an increased risk of heart disease. Again, it's because it's all linked to the diabetes, as well as the excess fat cells that now can form around the heart and the liver and the kidneys. The amount of weight gain around the middle is more closely associated with abnormal measurements of liver enzymes than the usual measure used to determine obesity, which is the BMI or body mass index. A pot belly is the most common indicator of what scientists have come to call syndrome X, also known as insulin resistance syndrome. One way to guard against syndrome X is to ignore the best medical advice to shun the low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet everyone knows is good for the heart. If you have syndrome X, and 60 to 75 million Americans do, that good diet could be deadly. Solution to this problem of insulin resistance is not reducing cholesterol, but rather keeping blood sugar stable. Anybody have any guesses where Neolife came about with their program? What is our core program? Your breakfast pack. No, breakfast pack. Oh. Your breakfast pack is there because your shake regulates the blood sugar levels. Glycemic response, your glycemic index, that is your shake. Yes, Botanical Balance is excellent for that, but that's a new addition. If you go back to the basics, that's why your breakfast pack was developed, because number one, your shake gives you your fiber, it gives you your vitamins, your minerals, and it gives you the enzymes that your body needs to process food. That's where the Neolife Shake came from, developed from so it started off with the Nutri-Shake, or what did they have? I think the early one was it was just called a protein powder or something like that. Then that became Nutri-Shake, which then became GR2, which has now developed into Neolife Shake. And that is one of your bases to get your blood sugar levels right. So most doctors and dietitians will tell you that you need a high carbohydrate diet. They're busy, all they're doing is creating more business for themselves. Carbohydrates are vital to your system, but not the simple carbohydrates that we generally eat these days, which is your sugars. Not the white crystalline stuff that you put in your coffee either. That's the hidden sugars that's in all your processed foods, in your sauces, in your soups, in your bread, in pretty much anything that is mass produced has got sugar in it. Even your juices have got a very high sugar content with very little fiber. So according to Tim Noakes, he will always talk about his LCHF, which is low carbohydrate, high fat or protein. And we need the carbohydrates, but it should be in the form of a complex carbohydrate, which is your beans and legumes and that sort of thing, which is giving you your sugars, because your brain needs glucose. Your brain is a glucose hog. If your blood sugar level drops too low, you will probably faint because your brain is not getting enough glucose. But if you have too much glucose, it leads to diabetes. So you've got to have that very, very careful balance. According to them as well, diets high in sugar and refined carbohydrates will easily cause syndrome X. First, you get elevated fats in your blood. Then you get fat deposited around the middle of the body. And eventually these fats increase your chance of a stroke or heart attack. And often that is caused by those little fat globules that break off and get into the blood supply and then lodge in the heart or the brain, leading to your stroke or your heart attack. Fat around the middle can be a killer. Right, so we've got 10 minutes left over here. So the suggestion is you eat multiple small meals, exercise regularly, and that does not mean going along, signing up in the nearest gym and pushing weights. can simply mean walking around your garden. Even doing housework is good exercise. When you go to the local local shopping center, park far away from the door, not right in the disabled parking bay, because that way you'll get some exercise. That is the simplest exercise you can do. You don't have to go overboard. Even lifting a few weights, and I'm not talking 50, 60 kilo weights, I'm talking a 2 kilo dumbbell or a 2 kilo bag of hopefully stone ground flour, not refined flour, but simple little things like that. Fill a little, if you have a 500 ml bottle of water, that's half a kilo. 2 1 liter bottles of water, there's 1 kilo per liter. You can lift those weights. It's just there to tone and to get your circulation going a bit better. And then restrict refined carbohydrates and sugars. And as I said before, be careful of the hidden sugars and the hidden salts. So as Louis will always tell you, when you're buying a product on the shelf, read the label. Because by law, what they put in there has to be on the label, and the closer you get to the beginning, that is the greatest amount of that particular item in that product. So some of the children's vitamins that you find in places like Clicks and Dis-Chem, the first or the second ingredient is sugar. Why are the kids getting hyper these days? Because they're on nutrition. We're feeding them sugar. Our products don't have sugar in them. So those are the little things that you need to be looking out for. I've obviously run out of time right now, but other signs of obesity, and which we know all about over there, I'm not going to get too much in that. And then a small waist is also an indication. A thin waist and large hips is a risk factor for Alzheimer's. And that I'll get into next week. Because I think it's quite an interesting one as well. Alzheimer's is not only just caused by aluminium, but also there are signs and symptoms that can lead to issues. So my waist is a problem, and the risk is high. One has to be careful of that. So yes, so we just need to be aware of these little signs and symptoms, and as we'll go through, you'll see, and this is why the more I read this book, the more I listen to the recordings, the more fascinated I get by these little signs that are warning signs along the way. So we've got about 6 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions or stories or comments or anything? Sorry, you're all on mute, so you have to unmute yourselves. Go, Debbie.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Interesting. Well done, Sean. It was very, very interesting. And I think it's going to be a good series. Very good series. It's amazing because John has always had a tummy. Always. And he's never drunk beer. So it's quite weird. That was
from my father.
Yeah.
Father.
That's the first thing the doctor always does is check his sugar levels, and his sugar levels have been spot on. But he's had this tummy since I met him, so that's 50 years ago. So and it's just one of those things that he's got and we can't get rid of. So I don't know, maybe we'll come around it with the breakfast pack.
Maybe.
We do take it, but we don't take it regularly.
Are you using Amitone?
Not regularly.
Try some Amitone for about 90 days and see if that makes a difference.
Okay, that's a good idea.
You take 3 tablets at night, 3 hours after your last meal, just before you go to bed. Do that for 90 days and check the difference.
Right, we will. We'll feed you back.
Good. So I've seen some very good results with that.
Good.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. It's just that we have tried everything, but it's just one of the things that I think
It's
We
genetics.
we think that yeah, he overdid the weights, definitely overdid the weights when he was young. And I think that's probably half his problem.
Yeah, very probable, because genetics do play a big role in a lot of things. I was chatting to one of our local pediatricians the other day. We just met in the street and we were chatting, and we got on the subject of diabetes. And his comment was that our local Indian population has got a great tendency towards diabetes. And I said, I find it very interesting as to why that is, because a lot of the local Indians are not that big. And I know some of them personally who are pre-diabetic or diabetic, and they're not exactly anything close to being overweight. And his comment was that in the early years, there was a limited number of families that came out from India, and they've interbred. With the result
Aibo.
is that diabetes has become more prevalent. And once he said that, it went, whoa, that makes a lot of sense. So we must never rule out genetics on a lot of things, because genetics can play a big role in a lot of issues. And all that this book is doing, it's highlighting things that it could be. You go to a doctor, and when they start doing a physical and they start asking you 1,010,000 questions, they're ruling out what your problem isn't, so that they can find out what your problem is. That's how a good diagnostician should be working.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you.
So
Sean, what about drinking water?
you need to be drinking enough water, but not too much, because too much of anything is bad for you. So too much water can knock your electrolytes out of balance, which can lead to problems. There is a formula that I need to find for you somewhere along the line that tells you exactly how much water you should be drinking according to your body weight. But a rough rule of thumb is between 1 to 2 liters of water per day. And especially now when it's hot,
Quite a bit.
we need to be drinking enough. What I do at work is I take a 1 liter flask of water to work with me. And my goal, which isn't always successful, but my goal is to finish that flask of water by the time I go home. I obviously drink water before, and I drink water once I am at home, but my goal during the day is to finish that 1 liter. And instead of going, oh, I've got to swallow a liter of water, every time I wash my hands, I take a mouthful. My first cup of coffee in the morning, and I try and only have 1 cup of coffee at work, I have a glass of water. I go to the bathroom, I come back, I have a mouthful of water. And by doing that in small little bits, 1 mouthful at a time, most days I can finish my water. So it's
And
Hmm?
Dr. Eddie Nambasi, he advised me. He said, first thing you should do when you wake up is have your water.
Correct.
At least a cup of water, room temperature.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a
And a
mug of
glass,
water next to my bed.
and a glass at night before you sleep.
Yes.
1 in the morning, 1 at night.
Hmm.
That's what I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Fascinating, Sean. Thank you. We're going to love this one. Love it.
Good.
Thank you.
All right. We have
Yep.
less than a minute, so we're going to sign off now. I'm just going to quit my recording here.